The fluorescent lights above me hummed softly, steady and white, like they always did this time of evening. The desks were arranged in a gentle semicircle. Student work lined the walls, paper sunflowers, bar graphs, character sketches in colored pencil. I'd laid out every child's progress report in a tidy manila folder, paper-clipped with notes in my cleanest handwriting. I had no reason to feel nervous. The evening had been smooth so far. Quiet nods from tired parents, polite conversations about reading levels and math skills. A few thank yous. A few tight smiles from parents who wished their children were doing better. All expected. All routine. And then I heard the knock. 3 soft taps on the open door. I turned to greet whoever was next, and everything stopped. James, Lydia, side by side, holding hands like a picture. Her hair longer than I remembered, a sleek wave tucked behind one ear. His posture still careless in the way that once felt charming. Both older now, sharper around the eyes. Married. They wore it like armor. And I stood still. It took them a second to register, to process. Their daughter's teacher was me. James's expression faltered. Lydia's mouth parted just slightly. She didn't speak. I smiled. Not wide, not fake, just a polite, closed-lip smile. The kind you give someone you used to know and no longer care to. Come in, I said. I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. My voice was calm, measured, steady. They moved like they were walking through fog, like the world had just shifted and they didn't know where the ground had gone. Emma's folder sat on the desk between us. Her handwriting was on the cover, traced in marker, a rainbow and a sticker with glitter stars. Sweet, earnest, pure. James reached for the chair first. Lydia followed, too slowly. They didn't know what to say. I let the silence sit. And for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't the one who owed anyone words. Not anymore. There was a time when Sundays meant French toast, old jazz, and Lydia curled sideways on my couch with her knees tucked under one of my throw blankets. James would be in the kitchen, flipping bacon with the lazy confidence of someone who thought charm could cook. Back then, I thought he was right. We had routines, shared group chats, double dates, inside jokes that spiraled into laughter over wine, the kind of closeness people envy. Lydia and I used to call each other soul sisters. That's what she wrote in the card she gave me on my birthday, the year James and I moved in together. To my soulmate in friendship, she penned in loopy cursive, underlining it twice. James and I had met at a nonprofit fundraiser. I was volunteering, clipboard in hand, while he strolled through the silent auction like he owned every item in the room. He offered to help carry boxes to my car that night. I said yes, mostly because I liked his smile, and partly because Lydia had nudged me and whispered, "He's cute. You should." 3 months later, he had a drawer in my apartment. 6 months after that, we signed a lease. Lydia had been the first to congratulate us. Brought over a home starter basket with candles and kitchen towels and a bottle of red neither of us could afford back then. She joked that she'd be our permanent third wheel. I laughed, not knowing how true that would become. We were close, the 3 of us. Weekly dinners, text chains that never ended, game nights, concerts, trips. There wasn't a version of my life back then that didn't include them. Him in the driver's seat, Lydia in the back seat with snacks, me reading directions. Looking back, I can't say there were signs. Not clear ones, not obvious enough. Maybe that's what betrayal looks like from the inside. Completely ordinary. Lydia once helped me pick out a birthday gift for James. She offered to hide it at her place to keep it a surprise. He thanked me that night like it meant the world. Later, I'd remember how her hand brushed his shoulder a little too easily when she laughed, how his eyes lingered on hers when he thought I wasn't looking, but I wasn't suspicious. I was trusting, and I thought that was a strength. We built something, the three of us. Not just friendship, not just love, a shared space that felt safe. And that's what made it the perfect place to hide a lie. It started small. Missed calls, James's phone lighting up at odd hours, Lydia becoming harder to reach. At first, I chalked it up to life. We were all busy, work was demanding, plans were scattershot, and growing up meant seeing friends less, not loving them less. That's what I told myself. The first time I felt something shift, it was at a barbecue. Lydia brought a new dessert, peach cobbler with a crumble top. James complimented it 3 times, said it tasted like childhood. I remember watching the way she looked at him, waiting for his reaction. I told myself it was nothing. Just pride. Just friendship. A week later, James canceled dinner. Said work had gone late. I ate alone. The next morning, I noticed his cologne was almost gone. Another week, Lydia showed up late to our brunch date, her lipstick too fresh and her excuses too loose. "Traffic," she said, shaking her head. "The city's a mess today." She laughed too loudly. I smiled. Let it go. Trust makes you slow to judge. Loyalty makes you blind. And when the people you love most are the ones drifting, your instinct isn't to question them. It's to pull harder. So I did. I planned more get-togethers. Tried to keep us all close. I offered rides, flexible plans, softness. I thought if I just tried harder, they'd come back to me. That whatever I was sensing was my own fear talking, not a fracture forming beneath my feet. But fractures don't announce themselves. They spread in silence, through smiles and shared laughter and the absence of answers. I noticed Lydia stopped sleeping over. She used to crash on my couch without hesitation, wine glass still in hand. But now, she always had a reason to leave early. James started turning his phone face down on the table. Subtle. Unremarkable. Until it wasn't. One night, I woke up and he wasn't in bed. The light in the living room was on. I walked out, quietly. Found him on the couch, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. When he saw me, he flinched, said it was work, some deadline he forgot to mention. I wanted to believe him, so I nodded, went back to bed. But the silence between us thickened. Not loud, not angry, just hollow. Around that time, Lydia stopped returning my texts with the same warmth. Her messages grew shorter. One-word answers. Delays. I told myself she was tired, overwhelmed, that she'd tell me if anything was wrong. But something was wrong. The closeness we'd built, the years of layered trust, they didn't vanish. They dulled, softened around the edges until nothing sharp was left to cut through the fog. I didn't know it then, but the people I loved most had already turned away. And all that was left was the slow, aching realization that I was the only one still holding on. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, gray outside. I'd just come home from work, shoulders heavy, mind thick from another meeting that should have been an email. The apartment smelled like lavender from the diffuser I'd set that morning. I dropped my bag by the door and bent to take off my shoes when I heard it. James's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. He wasn't home. It buzzed again and again. I walked over without thinking, picked it up to move it. The screen, lit up with a name. Lydia. 3 messages. 1 word pierced through me. Soon. I set the phone down. Not hard, not loud, just deliberate. There's a silence that comes before impact. Not the kind filled with dread, but the kind soaked in clarity. The kind that tells you everything's about to change and you don't get to look away. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat at the kitchen table, hands folded in front of me, and waited for James to come home. He arrived 20 minutes later, all casual smiles and a bag of takeout in his hand. He kissed the top of my head like nothing was wrong. I watched him unpack cartons of food. He asked about my day. I told him it was fine. Then I asked to see his phone. The pause was short, almost invisible. But it was there. His eyes narrowed just slightly, and he said, "Why?" My voice didn't shake. "Because Lydia texted 3 times, just now." His mouth opened, then closed. Then he lied. Said it was about a surprise. Something for me. That they were planning a getaway, something to cheer me up. He smiled like it was reasonable. Like it made sense for my boyfriend and my best friend to scheme in secret and sign off with soon. I stared at him. Then I asked if he was sleeping with her. His face changed. Not a confession, not a denial, just that flicker, the one that happens when someone realizes the curtain's been pulled and there's no stage left to perform on. He said nothing, and that was all I needed. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, pulled my suitcase from under the bed, and started packing. He followed, kept saying my name like that would stop me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw things. I folded each shirt neatly, zippered my toiletries into a side pouch, and moved with the steadiness of someone who'd stopped waiting for explanations. When I reached the door, he said, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time saw a stranger standing where the man I loved used to be. "No," I said. "It never is." Then I left, and neither of them followed the first week. After I left, everything moved slowly. Mornings stretched long and shapeless. I stayed in my sister's guest room, surrounded by boxes I didn't unpack. She made me tea every evening, didn't ask questions, just sat nearby with the kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled. I answered no texts. I blocked both their numbers. There was nothing to say. They didn't try hard. A few emails, James asking if we could talk, Lydia pretending she didn't know what went wrong. I deleted each one without opening them fully. If they wanted closure, they'd have to find it without me. The betrayal was clean, surgical. No gray areas to get lost in. The people I trusted most had chosen each other in secret and discarded me in the process. There were no fights, no dramatic goodbyes, just a door that closed and stayed shut. What followed wasn't grief, not exactly. It was quieter than that. A kind of internal stillness. Like standing in an empty house after the furniture's gone, walls echoing with the memory of a life that no longer exists. I scrolled through social media more than I should have. Not to engage, just to see. They didn't wait long. Within a month, a photo surfaced. James and Lydia at a music festival, arms around each other, sunlight on their faces. Her hand rested on his chest like it belonged there. His caption read, "Everything happens for a reason." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. There was no apology coming, no remorse. They'd rewritten the story without me. Cast themselves as people who found love unexpectedly. Never mind the blood trail behind them. I started walking every morning, just to move, just to remind my body that time was still passing. I applied for jobs in new cities, far enough away that I wouldn't run into them at grocery stores or street fairs. I wanted clean air, fresh names, distance from everything that had cracked. Eventually, I got an offer. A small school needed a reading specialist. The pay was modest, the staff kind, the town quiet. I took it without hesitation. Packing was easy. I left behind the furniture we'd picked together, the plates we'd argued over in the home goods aisle, the memories that still clung to the corners of my old apartment. I kept only what was mine. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It started to feel earned. Some nights, I still heard their laughter in memory. A phrase Lydia used to say, a song James always hummed while shaving. They lingered like ghosts, but I didn't invite them in. I wasn't waiting for justice. I wasn't chasing vengeance. I just wanted to be free of the noise they left behind. The town I moved to wasn't remarkable. Rows of small shops, a single movie theater, neighborhoods stitched with picket fences and front porches that faced west to catch the last light. It was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar at first, then necessary. My new apartment was small but clean. Second floor, corner unit, enough sun to keep a plant alive if I remembered to water it. I furnished it with intention. No clutter, no shared pieces with invisible fingerprints. Everything in it was mine, chosen, paid for, untouched by the past. The school welcomed me without hesitation. Staff meetings over coffee and donuts, students who asked innocent questions and gave unsolicited compliments. "You smell like cookies," one girl told me on the first day. I smiled, took it as a good omen. Teaching grounded me. There's a rhythm to the classroom. Morning greetings, the rustle of notebooks opening, the soft thud of pencil erasers. Kids don't fake affection. They don't perform sincerity. They either trust you or they don't. And day by day, trust grew, slowly, like anything worth keeping. I taught reading comprehension and small group literacy. My classroom had a corner rug, low bookshelves, and laminated charts I stayed late to design myself. It became a space of calm, structure, and consistency. Everything my last life had lacked. No one here knew my story, not the full version. A few colleagues asked where I moved from. I kept my answers vague. Just needed a change. That was enough. Most people nodded like they understood. In truth, I was rebuilding from rubble. But I didn't wear it on my face. I walked to work most mornings, a travel mug in hand, scarf wrapped high around my chin. The wind here cut sharper, but the air felt clearer, like I could breathe again without bracing first. Evenings were mine now. No awkward silences at the dinner table. No double-checking messages. No looking for loyalty in people who'd already given it away. I spent that time reading, reorganizing my books, playing instrumental music too soft for anyone else to hear. Some nights, I'd catch myself wondering if they ever talked about me. If James ever mentioned my name when Lydia asked about old memories. If Lydia ever paused before posting another photo, thinking of what she'd taken. But I never lingered there, because every thought of them was a thread leading backward, and I was walking forward. Starting over wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with declarations or dramatic gestures. It came with quiet choices, routines. The decision to build again, even if the foundation had once cracked. And brick by patient brick, I did. Her name was Emma Shaw. She came into my classroom in early September, a shy second grader with a glittery backpack and a habit of tucking her sleeves over her hands. She was soft-spoken, curious, and always the first to volunteer when I asked for a line leader. I didn't recognize the name at first. Shaw was common enough, and I had no reason to look deeper. To me, she was just Emma, bright, kind, eager to learn. She read ahead of grade level and colored with painstaking detail. Her desk was always neat. She reminded me of a younger version of myself. On the second week of class, she stayed after dismissal to help me straighten chairs. "Do you like books?" she asked, watching me shelve a stack of early readers. "I love them," I said. She beamed. "Me too. My mommy says I read like she did when she was little." I smiled. "That's a great compliment." She nodded, then reached into her backpack. "Want to see my family?" Before I could answer, she pulled out a photo, slightly crumpled at the corners. It was a printed snapshot. A couple standing on a beach, sun flaring behind them. A little girl, Emma, perched between them. My heart stilled. Lydia. James. I froze, eyes locked on the image, his hand on her back. Her face tilted toward him, full of ease. They hadn't changed much. A little older, maybe. More polished. Still beautiful. Still proud of what they'd built. Emma looked up at me, unaware. "That's my mom and dad," she said, pointing. "They met a long time ago." I nodded slowly, careful not to let my expression shift. "It's a lovely photo." She tucked it away, humming softly, unaware of what she'd handed me. She didn't see my hands go still. She didn't see the weight behind my smile. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the image seared behind my eyelids. They had a daughter in my classroom. A daughter who called me her favorite teacher by the second month. The irony was surgical, precise, unplanned and sharp in the way fate sometimes is. I had spent years untangling myself from their story, only to find their child in the very heart of my new life. I didn't tell anyone. Not my colleagues, not my sister, not my reflection. There was no decision to make. Emma was my student, my responsibility, my innocence to protect. And they, James and Lydia, would learn that some revenge doesn't come loud or cruel. Sometimes it comes quietly, with a clipboard, with a classroom, with a child who has no idea what history sits on the other side of her parent-teacher conference form. The realization came slowly, not in a dramatic rush, but in fragments, small clues that threaded themselves together one quiet afternoon. Emma had been working on a family tree project. Each student was asked to bring in pictures and write a few lines about the people closest to them. It was a simple assignment, something meant to build confidence and storytelling skills. She handed in her work with a proud smile. The page was neat, her handwriting careful. At the top, my family. Beneath that, 2 columns, Mom and Dad. Beside their names, photos. I recognized the beach one, and then another, taken indoors. James crouched beside Emma, helping her tie her shoes. Lydia was in the background, holding a coffee mug, mid-laugh. It was casual, warm, a picture-perfect moment, and it landed like a slow breath turning sharp in my chest. I kept my face still, complimented her penmanship, praised her effort. Later, when the students had gone home and the halls quieted to the soft shuffle of janitorial carts, I sat at my desk and stared at the project again. Not as a teacher, not as someone tasked with grading, but as a woman who now saw the full circle she had stepped into. Emma Shaw, daughter of James Shaw and Lydia Bennett. Now Lydia Shaw, I assumed. The same Lydia who once cried into my lap after a breakup. The same James who once said, I was the calm he never knew he needed. The same pair who dismantled my life without warning and vanished into a curated version of joy. And now their child sat in the second row of my classroom, drawing rainbows and asking if we could have a reading party on Fridays. The past hadn't come knocking. It had walked in, taken a seat, and smiled at me with baby teeth and mismatched socks. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Instead, I stood, walked to the cabinet, and gently placed her project inside a folder labeled Family Units. It would be graded like every other child's. I wouldn't touch her innocence with the weight of what I knew. Wouldn't let their betrayal bleed into her world. But I also wouldn't pretend. I would meet this moment with the same precision I had rebuilt my life with. There would be a parent-teacher night soon. Names on the sign-up sheet had started to fill in. I'd seen theirs. A late slot on a Thursday. They didn't know yet. They didn't know who would be waiting across the desk, but they would. And when they walked in, faces arranged in comfort and expectation, they'd see me, not broken, not angry, just present and unmovable. The hallway buzzed with soft conversation, the low murmur of parents checking schedules and sipping coffee from paper cups. Each classroom door stood open, light spilling out onto polished floors. I sat at my desk, folders arranged in alphabetical order, notes clipped neatly on top. Emma's sat second from the end. I'd read it twice. Not because it needed editing, but because I wanted to make sure every word was fair. Not a single comment hinted at anything other than her growth, her kindness, her quiet leadership. She was doing well, and she deserved to know it. The earlier appointments passed quickly. Smiles, questions about summer reading, occasional concerns about attention spans or handwriting. I listened. I advised. I did my job. Then, at 7:18 p.m., I heard footsteps that slowed at my door. I looked up, and there they were. James entered first, a clipboard in hand, dressed in a slate gray coat I hadn't seen before. His face was thinner, still handsome in that curated, effortless way. Lydia followed close behind, hair pulled into a high knot, minimal makeup, expression unreadable. They stopped in the doorway. I didn't move. Recognition swept across both their faces like a dropped glass, fast, sharp, and impossible to ignore. James blinked. Lydia's mouth opened slightly, then shut again. She looked like she'd been slapped by memory. "Miss Rowe," James said. His voice had that strained brightness people use when they're pretending not to drown. "Good evening," I said, gesturing toward the chairs. "Please, have a seat." They sat, movement stiffer than I remembered. Lydia folded her hands in her lap, nails painted pale pink. James tapped his pen against the clipboard, eyes flicking around the room like he was hoping this was a mistake. I opened the folder. "Emma's doing exceptionally well," I began, tone even. "She reads above grade level, participates with kindness, and has become a quiet leader in class." Lydia nodded too quickly. "She adores you," she said, her voice thin. I looked at her. She flinched. James cleared his throat. "We had no idea. I mean, when we signed up, we didn't realize that I'd be her teacher." I finished for him, my voice calm. He gave a weak smile. "Yes." I said nothing, just turned another page. We discussed reading strategies, math units, behavior reports, all professionally, all smoothly. But their eyes never stopped searching mine for emotion, for a crack, for anything they could use to regain footing. They found none. When the meeting ended, I stood. They followed suit, awkwardly. Lydia finally said it. "We didn't mean for—" "I hope Emma continues to thrive," I said, cutting the air cleanly. "Good night," and I turned away. They left in silence, the kind that rings louder than any apology. For the first time, they weren't the ones holding the narrative. I was. The next morning, I arrived at school before sunrise. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. There's something about an empty classroom at dawn. The stillness, the soft hum of the heater warming the space. It feels like a blank page, untouched, clean. I sat at my desk and ran my fingers across the stack of folders, pausing briefly on Emma's before tucking it into the finished pile. They had looked rattled the night before, not loud, not panicked, but off balance in the way people do when the past walks into the room dressed in composure. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't offer judgment. I didn't need to. I had done nothing but my job. And still, they'd left shaken. By noon, word had trickled through the hallway. Harmless staff chatter. Emma's mom and dad looked tense last night. Something felt weird. I thought they'd be warmer. I didn't offer anything, because the shift had already begun. It wasn't a confrontation, it was a recalibration. They had walked into that room believing they were stepping into neutral territory, a parent-teacher conference like any other, but what they got instead was an unspoken reckoning. They were used to the version of me who trusted, who softened, who bent. But that woman had packed her life into a suitcase and disappeared, without a trace. The one who stood before them now was measured, precise, entirely unbothered by their discomfort. Emma returned to class the next day, her usual cheerful self. She hugged my waist during recess lineup and told me her mom made pancakes for dinner. I nodded and smiled. No child should carry the weight of their parents' mistakes. That afternoon, I passed Lydia in the school parking lot. She was leaning against her car, arms crossed, clearly waiting. She stepped forward when she saw me. "Anna." I didn't stop walking. "Please," she said, voice low, almost desperate. "Can we just—" "Your daughter is doing well," I said without looking at her. "Focus on that." Her mouth opened again, but the words died before they reached me. I didn't owe her anything. Not a scene, not a conversation, not closure. The shift wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space. The one they'd both tried to erase me from, the one I had quietly rebuilt, brick by brick, without them. And now, every time they dropped Emma off, every time they sat in a school assembly or read a class newsletter, they would see my name. Not in anger, not in shame, but in quiet permanence. I wasn't in their story anymore. They were in mine. There's a strange kind of quiet that comes with being forgotten by people who once swore they never would. James used to say he couldn't imagine his life without me. Lydia once told me, with tears in her eyes, that our friendship was the safest thing she'd ever known. They both lied. Or maybe they just outgrew their truths. What they don't know, what they'll never truly understand, is how much I remember. The night before their wedding, someone sent me a photo. No name, no message, just an image. The two of them at a rehearsal dinner, wine glasses raised, her hand resting on the curve of his shoulder. I stared at it until the screen dimmed, then powered my phone off and threw it into a drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I sat on the floor in silence and let the final piece fall. They wanted me erased, cleanly, without mess. They didn't argue when I left, didn't chase, didn't ask how I was, even once. They repackaged the story and shared it with the world, the new couple who found love after heartbreak. What they don't know is that I saw the emails. Lydia forgot to log out of her account once, months before it all came apart. I saw their thread. How it started with, "I think about you sometimes," and slipped into things more intimate. Plans. jokes I was never meant to see. And I said nothing, because I wanted to be wrong. What they don't know is that I wrote a letter to each of them and burned both the same night I moved out. Not out of rage, but to rid my hands of words they never deserved. What they don't know is that I could have told their families, could have forwarded the messages, could have dropped truth like a match into their curated world and watched it catch fire. But I didn't, because what I wanted wasn't destruction, it was distance. And now, years later, the past has looped back, tethered to a child who did nothing wrong, a child I teach with fairness and care, even as her parents flinch every time they see my name at the bottom of a permission slip. That's what they'll never grasp. The weight of being kind to the living proof of your betrayal. The grace it takes to hold steady when the people who hurt you pretend you're invisible. They thought they buried me. Instead, they planted me right in the center of their future. I don't need revenge. I've already been written into their lives in a way they can never undo. And every school year that Emma steps into my classroom, they'll remember exactly who I am. Not the woman they discarded, the woman who remembered. Emma had a habit of arriving early. She'd sit at her desk with her book open before the bell rang, legs swinging gently beneath the chair, completely absorbed in whatever world she'd chosen that week. Lately, it was animal rescue stories. Last month, it was fairy tales rewritten with stronger princesses. She once told me, "Books make me feel like I can do anything." I nodded. They should. I never let her see the shift in my eyes when she said things like that. The weight behind my silence. Because no matter what her last name was, Emma was still a child, still curious, still good. And none of what happened between her parents and me was hers to carry. She asked once, innocently, if I had kids. "No," I said gently. "Not yet." She seemed satisfied with that. Went back to her coloring. That was the thing. They'd given her life, and somehow that life had ended up under my care. Not by design, not by revenge, but by something deeper, a quiet symmetry. And every day I treated her with the same fairness I offered every student, not because I had to, but because I chose to. Teaching her was never the hard part. The hard part was knowing that each smile she gave me, each proud moment when she solved a problem or read aloud with perfect clarity, would ripple back to them. That they'd hear about it over dinner, that my name would be said in their home with praise, spoken through a child who didn't know the full history. That was the real power, not vengeance. Presence. Emma once brought me a drawing. It was a simple crayon sketch. Our classroom, the bookshelf, a bright sun in the corner with smiley faces drawn on every student. Above it, she'd written, "Miss Rowe's class is the best place." I hung it on the wall with the others. No special treatment, no spotlight, but I kept a copy tucked in my drawer. Some days, I'd glance at it between lessons, not to feel powerful, but to remind myself why I stayed calm, why I kept the lines clean, why I never once let their betrayal touch her experience. Because grace, when chosen, is louder than anger, and Emma would never be a casualty of someone else's decisions. Every worksheet returned, every gold star on her folder, every quiet moment where she felt safe in this space, those were my acts of quiet defiance. Not in rage, but in control. They may have rewritten the past without me, but they could never erase what I had built now. And every time they saw Emma's eyes light up when she spoke of school, they'd feel it. They'd know I was still here, just not in the way they expected. The school year slipped into winter with its usual rhythm: parent newsletters, science projects, mittens forgotten on hallway hooks. Emma thrived. She read aloud with confidence, volunteered to help classmates who struggled, and once organized a coat drive for a nearby shelter with the help of her mother. Lydia emailed me to say thank you. The message was brief, grateful, warm, even. She thanked me for encouraging Emma's compassion, for helping her come out of her shell. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the tab without responding. I didn't need her gratitude, not because it wasn't deserved, but because it came too late. People think presence is passive, that staying silent is the same as staying small. But presence, real presence, is its own kind of thunder. The kind you don't hear until it's already overhead. Every week, I stood before the class and taught with care, with patience, with structure. And every week, Emma went home with stories about what she'd learned, what I'd said, how I made reading fun, or helped her feel brave when she didn't know an answer. And every time she told them, I was there, not in person, but in their home, in their kitchen, in their daily lives. Lydia once occupied that place in mine. Now I occupied it in hers, without effort, without permission, without ever knocking on the door. That's what they never understood. I didn't need to break their peace to reclaim mine. I didn't need to haunt their marriage to make a point. I only needed to live, well, steady, visible, to let them know I wasn't erased. I had simply changed shape, and they couldn't avoid me without hurting the one thing they both claimed to love most, Emma. I never used that, never manipulated it, but I knew the weight of it, the quiet knowledge that I had become the person they had to respect because their daughter did. At a school assembly, I caught Lydia watching me from across the gym. I was organizing the kids into rows for a class song. Emma waved at me and grinned. I smiled back. Lydia's face tightened. Not with jealousy, with recognition. She understood. I hadn't just survived what they did to me. I had risen through it, without theatrics, without revenge plots, without self-destruction. And now, I stood in a place they couldn't ignore. They couldn't remove me without harming their child. They couldn't speak against me without sounding bitter. And they couldn't pretend I never mattered. Because I mattered to the one person who looked at me with pure, unfiltered trust. That was the power of presence. And it echoed louder than anything they could say. They started showing up more often. First at the holiday recital, then again at the book fair. Always together, always polite, always a few steps behind Emma's joy. I could feel their eyes on me, measuring, watching, waiting for some slip, but I never gave them one. I was just her teacher, nothing more, nothing less. But every so often, Lydia tried to step closer. She lingered after pickup one afternoon, coat unzipped, keys in hand, pretending to search her bag. I knew she wanted to speak. I walked past her with a nod. Professional. Distant. A week later, she left a note on my desk. It was folded neatly. A small square. No envelope. Just my name, written in her handwriting. The same. Loops and curves I once recognized on birthday cards and sticky notes left on my fridge. I opened it at home. Inside, 5 lines. I know we'll never undo what happened. But thank you for being kind to her. I see it. and I know you didn't have to be. I folded it back without reacting. Kindness was never a favor. It was a decision. A boundary I'd drawn not for her sake, but for Emma's. Still, the note stayed in my drawer, tucked behind lesson plans. Not because I forgave her, but because it was a reminder of what guilt looks like when it finally realizes it has no power left. James never wrote, but his silences were louder, the way he stiffened during conferences, how he avoided my eyes when I listed Emma's strengths, the way his signature always came with a pause, as if every form he signed was another admission of what he no longer controlled. Their marriage, from the outside, looked intact, polished. But occasionally, small cracks showed. Emma once drew a picture of her family. She colored herself in the middle, holding hands with two tall figures. But one of them stood slightly apart. A space between them, just wide enough to notice. She asked if she could redo it. "I forgot something," she said. "Mom's not wearing her necklace." She redrew it the next day, added a heart around all three of them. But I remembered the first one. Small glimpses. Not enough to say anything, just enough to feel something under the surface shifting. They were building a life, yes, but it wasn't as seamless as the version they posted online. And I didn't need to see the fractures to know they were there, because I knew what they were built on. And no matter how deep you bury betrayal, it leaves seams. Visible only in the quiet moments. The ones you think no one's watching. But I was. I always had been. The invitation was folded in thirds, decorated with stickers and careful handwriting. Emma handed it to me at the end of the day, beaming. "It's at our house," she said, bouncing slightly on her toes. "There's going to be a magician and cupcakes with sparkles." I smiled, accepted the card, and told her thank you. Inside, the address was printed in pale pink. Their names at the bottom, James and Lydia Shaw. It wasn't the first birthday invite I'd received. I rarely attended. Boundaries mattered. But this one made me pause longer than usual. I set it aside and went on with my evening. A day later, Lydia appeared at school during dismissal. She approached me near the front doors, bundled in a heavy coat, eyes uncertain. "I hope you don't feel obligated," she said, voice low. "Emma really wanted you there." I nodded once. "I appreciate the invitation." She opened her mouth, like she might say more, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned toward a student who needed help with a zipper, and the moment passed. On the day of the party, I didn't go. I imagined the setup. Balloons tied to chairs, a magician sweating under stage lights, Lydia playing hostess with practiced ease, while James grilled hot dogs and smiled like this version of life had always been the plan. They wouldn't have expected me to show, but part of them, I'm sure, hoped I would. To prove something. That I wasn't bothered. That we'd all moved on. Instead, I stayed home, made tea, graded papers with soft piano music playing in the background. That Monday, Emma brought in a slice of cake wrapped in foil. "Since you couldn't come," she said, placing it gently on my desk. I looked at her, her face so open, so proud. No hint of disappointment, just the kind of quiet understanding only children can carry without realizing it. "Thank you," I said. "That's very thoughtful." She grinned, skipped off to her seat. An hour later, Lydia showed up unannounced. She asked the office if she could speak to me. Said she had something quick to drop off when they called down. I told them no. I didn't need to see her face again. Not in my classroom. Not on my time. Later that week, she left a voicemail. "I'm not trying to make things worse," she said. I wanted to thank you. Again. You've been good to her. better than I ever deserved. She was right. I had been better than she deserved. Because grace isn't weakness, it's control, and the strength to say no to an invitation, to a second chance, to the temptation of being seen, is sometimes the clearest form of power there is. The final week of school always carried a different kind of energy, lighter, restless. Students buzzed through the hallways, fueled by the promise of summer and the finality of things. Desks were cleared, bulletin boards stripped. The air smelled faintly of dry erase markers and sun-warmed linoleum. I spent the last afternoon organizing report cards into manila envelopes, one for each student. Emma's was among the last. I wrote her name in smooth, even script and slid her report inside along with a handwritten note. Emma, your kindness and curiosity made our classroom brighter. Keep asking questions. Keep being brave. I'm proud of you. No mention of her parents. No acknowledgement of anything outside the bounds of her own small world. At dismissal, the hallway pulsed with parents arriving early. Kids darted in and out of classrooms saying rushed goodbyes, arms full of construction paper and half-used notebooks. I stood by the door, handing out envelopes one by one. Then I saw him, James. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, wearing a soft blue shirt and sunglasses tucked into the collar. Emma ran to him, chattering about the popsicles we'd handed out during recess. He laughed, hoisted her up briefly, then set her down and caught my eye. I held out the envelope. He stepped forward, took it without a word, and for a moment, we stood in silence. His fingers brushed mine, just slightly. Intentional or not, I couldn't say. He opened his mouth, probably to say something polite, maybe even to apologize, years too late. But I was already turning. Take care, Emma, I said, bending slightly to meet her eyes. Have a wonderful summer. She threw her arms around me, quick and sure. I'll miss you. I smiled. I'll miss you too. Then I stood upright and faced James again. He looked older now, not tired but worn, like someone who had learned to measure words carefully. He hesitated, that familiar pause where charm used to live. Anna, he began. I didn't let him finish. I turned away, walked back into the classroom, and closed the door behind me. No bitterness, no fanfare, just closure. Later, I watched through the window as they walked to the car, Emma skipping ahead, James trailing slightly behind, the envelope in his hand like a weight he didn't know how to carry. I didn't need to see his expression to know what lingered. He had held a piece of my life once. But now, I held something he couldn't touch. His daughter's respect. And that would never be his to take. It came in a small envelope, folded carefully, slipped between the pages of my planner during a busy morning. I found it only because I was looking for a pen. The handwriting was unmistakable, childlike, uneven, with big loops and dots over the eyes that lingered like little smiles. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in colorful crayon. Dear Miss Rowe, you are the best teacher ever. Thank you for helping me read and for being nice. I like when you smile and when you let me choose books. You make school fun. Love, Emma. I held the note in my hands longer than I expected. It wasn't just a child's thank you. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a small victory, a thread tying me to someone who had chosen me, who trusted me without conditions. I thought about how much she must have understood in her own way. Not the details, not the years of betrayal and broken promises, but the feeling of safety I gave her, the space where she could just be a child. I kept the letter in my desk drawer, folded and protected. It became something I revisited on days when the weight of the past threatened to pull me under. There was no bitterness in those words, no second chances asked for, just pure, simple gratitude. That was all I ever wanted. Later, after school, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the letter resting beside me. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. I thought about the path I'd walked to get here. The cracks in trust, the quiet rebuilding, the moments of stillness that had grown into something stronger. The letter was a reminder that healing isn't loud. It's not a battle cry or a grand gesture. It's a small, steady light that keeps burning, even when the world tries to dim it. I wasn't defined by their choices or their betrayals. I was defined by the strength to rise above them, to be present, to be kind, to be patient, to be someone who doesn't need revenge to feel whole. And as I folded the letter back into its envelope, I smiled softly, because sometimes the deepest triumphs come not from shouts or storms, but from the quiet hearts that keep beating, steady and true. The last day of school came quietly. The halls were filled with laughter and hurried goodbyes, but for me, it felt like a closing chapter, one I had written carefully, without haste or regret. I packed my things slowly, not because I was eager to leave, but because I wanted to savor the moment. The stacks of graded papers, the carefully arranged bookshelves, the empty desks that had held so many stories. Emma's desk was the last I touched. I placed her crayon drawing on top of the neat pile of her work, a silent nod to the journey we'd shared this year. There was no ceremony, no fanfare, just the quiet knowledge that this was an ending that felt like a beginning. I thought about the people I had left behind, the friends who turned strangers, the love that had turned to betrayal, the life that had been reshaped by silence and strength. They would never understand what I had gained, because it wasn't revenge, it was peace. Peace in knowing I had not been erased, peace in knowing I had reclaimed myself, and peace in the quiet victories, the ones that come in the smiles of children, in the letters folded with care, in the moments of grace that no one else sees. I locked the classroom door behind me and stepped into the sunlight. The air was warm, touched with the promise of summer. I didn't look back. I walked down the school steps with my head held high, carrying nothing but the certainty that I had done enough, that I had been enough. Years ago, they had tried to write me out of their story. But the truth was, I had already written myself into theirs, not as a victim, not as a shadow, but as a quiet force, steady, unyielding, and unforgettable. And as I walked away, I knew this wasn't just closure, it was freedom.